Before World War I, before World War II, there was this war, a war that was fought on 5 continents, a war that drew in empires from Europe, North America, Africa, Asia, and the Caribbean. A war that changed borders, ended dynasties, buried empires, and gave birth to the modern world. But most people don't know its name. It wasn't just a war between Britain and France. It was Britain versus France versus Spain versus Austria versus Russia, and more. It was a power struggle, a land grab, a trade war, and a colonial explosion all at once. They called it the 7 Years' War, and this is the untold story of the conflict that shaped the 18th century and lit the fuse for the American Revolution. The year is 1754. In the Ohio River Valley, a young British officer leads a group of colonial militia through dense forests. His name? George Washington. He's just 22 years old, and he's about to fire the first shots of a global war. Washington attacks a French scouting party in what is now western Pennsylvania. A French diplomat is killed. Retaliation is swift. This skirmish, barely a paragraph in most school textbooks, is the match that lights the fuse. By 1756, the conflict explodes into full-scale war. And not just in America. In Europe, Frederick the Great of Prussia is fighting Austria, France, and Russia all at once. In India, the British East India Company and the French Compagnie des Indes battle for supremacy. In West Africa, ports and forts change hands. In the Caribbean, sugar islands become battlegrounds. And in North America, it becomes a brutal, bloody war for empire. We call it the French and Indian War in the US, but that's just one front. The 7 Years' War was everywhere, and it was chaos. Nations switched sides. Alliances broke. Colonies burned. For Britain, it was the fight of a lifetime, and they were losing. At first, the British couldn't keep up. French forces, along with indigenous allies like the Huron and Algonquin, were ambushing British troops, destroying forts and pushing deep into colonial territory. Meanwhile, in Europe, the French army was making gains, and the Russians were threatening Prussia from the east. It was all unraveling until William Pitt took over. Pitt was a brilliant strategist and politician in Britain who saw the war not as a European conflict, but as a global one. He poured money into the Royal Navy. He funded Prussia to keep the enemies in Europe busy, and he sent a massive wave of British troops and ships to North America, the Caribbean, and India. The war turned. In 1759, a year known as the Year of Victories, Britain struck blow after blow. In India, Robert Clive crushed the French at Plassey. In Canada, General James Wolfe defeated the French at the Plains of Abraham, near Quebec City, though he died in the process. In the Caribbean, the British captured islands like Guadeloupe and Martinique. In West Africa, they took Senegal. In Europe, Prussia held the line. Suddenly, it wasn't just a war, it was a British Empire in the making. In 1763, the Treaty of Paris ended the war. France gave up Canada, Spain handed over Florida. Britain emerged as the world's dominant colonial power. It was a triumph. But it came at a massive price. Because all those victories, they weren't cheap. Britain had borrowed heavily to fund the war. The national debt doubled, and now Parliament was staring at the bill. Guess who they expected to help pay it? The colonies, especially the American ones. Britain believed, we protected you. We won you land. You should help with the costs. So came the taxes. The Sugar Act, the Stamp Act, the Townshend Acts, and the protests. What colonists remembered wasn't a British protection. They remembered being treated like pawns, being told where they could and couldn't settle, being taxed without a voice. They remembered the British soldiers who stayed behind. And they started to ask, why are we paying for a war that didn't benefit us? Why are we still under the thumb of a king across an ocean? The 7 Years' War didn't just redraw the map, it redrew minds. It turned colonists into critics, critics into rebels, and rebels into revolutionaries. Without the 7 Years' War, there might never have been an American Revolution. But that's just one ripple, because this war changed the entire world. In Canada, French culture remained, but British rule took over. In India, British dominance deepened, laying the foundation for the Raj. In Europe, the balance of power shifted dramatically. Spain lost its grip. France fell into financial crisis, which helped spark the French Revolution just decades later. Even indigenous nations felt the aftermath. Tribes like the Iroquois had tried to play both sides, maintaining power through diplomacy. But after Britain's victory, native voices were pushed aside, land was seized, treaties were broken, the colonists, now empowered, moved west, and conflict followed. So why don't more people talk about this war? Because it's complicated. It doesn't fit neatly into a single narrative. It has too many fronts, too many players, too many betrayals. But that's also what makes it fascinating. This wasn't just Britain versus France. It was indigenous nations choosing allies. It was a young George Washington learning hard lessons. It was spies, sieges, and scorched earth. It was a world war before we had a word for it, and it ended with a world forever changed. Britain had won the war. But in winning, they'd set the stage to lose something even greater: America. Because the real cost of victory was revolution.